All right, I'm Charlie Craven, and I am about to tie for you one of the most iconic saltwater flies of all time. This fly is called a Lefty's Deceiver, and this is sort of the fly that started it all. Um, really, just a super simple design, uh, coupling some saddle hackle and bucktail, and you could make it as complicated as you like. And I'm kind of doing the full dress version for you here, but this was Lefty Cray's pattern. And if there was ever a iconic fly fisherman, this was the guy for sure. Um, but let's get into tying this. This is a fly you can use anywhere for anything. Scale it down even for trout size stuff, and by all means, anything that swims in salt water is going to eat this. This is a generic bait fish imitation. Work anywhere in the world you go. You can tie it in every color and every combination of colors that you can think of. So let's get to it. I'm going to start with a Tiemco 811S, and I'm tying a size 2 here, but obviously you can tie this as big or as small as you like. And I'm going to start with some Danville monocord in 3/0 white, and I'll just start it behind the hook eye, and I'm going to dress the shank all the way back to the bend. And I just want a smooth, even layer. It's a fairly long shank hook. Not so much long shank, I guess, as it is just big. But I'm going to come all the way back to the bend. Then I'm going to bump the thread up, just up around the hook point there. And for the tails, we're going to use saddle hackle feathers. And these are Whiting American saddle hackles. These are fairly webby, nice webby saddle hackle feathers. And typically they would use 4. You know, back in the day, saddle hackles weren't quite as good as what we've got today, so they'd use 4 of them. But with these nice webby ones, I'm just going to use 2. And I'm going to cut these to length, which is going to be about twice the hook shank, maybe 2.5 times the hook shank. And I'm going to put them face to face or inside to inside so that they're cupped together. So they just give me a single profile. And I want to even the tips up, make sure that's even. And then down here at the butt end, I'm just going to strip a little bit of the base of the feather. Get this where I can see it here, and then I'll show you. Like so. So I've got 2 bare stems there, and I like those to be the exact same length, so I'll just cut them to the same length. And they're just slightly less than 1/4 inch long, I'd say. I'm going to take those 2 feathers, and I'm going to lay them on top of the hook bin there. And what I want, let me get just a couple turns on there. What I want is I want those 2 feathers just laying one right next to the other, just like my fingers there. So I'm going to catch them one right next to the other. And then as I wrap back over, I'm going to lift up on those feathers. As I wrap back, I may even cant them slightly toward me to accommodate the thread torque. And what I should end up with is a tail that appears as 1 feather, like that. Should be right straight up on the hook. We're looking pretty good there. I'm happy with that. And our tails are pretty even, so I'm going to call that good. You know, this is something you can fight with for a long time, but that kind of lifting the butt ends and wrapping back over them trick is the best thing I've seen. So I'm going to bump my thread forward a little bit. And at this point, I'm going to tie in 3 or 4 strands of silver flash blue. Of course, you can use crystal flash here as well. I'm going to tie this in at the center of its length. And I'm going to pull half back along the far side of the tail there. And then I'll grab the remaining strands and fold those along my near side and catch them. Kind of wet those down. And those should be just a little longer than the tail. I don't like them to be all exactly even, so I'll try to cut them at random lengths so they're a little jagged. That's just going to be our little lateral line on our bait fish. Add a little bit of flash to them. And then for the body, the original Deceiver, being super simple, did not even have a body, just had thread. And that's by all means, you know, perfectly acceptable. It hardly shows, but I like to finish it off a little bit. So I'm going to tie some flat diamond braid in here, and this is just pearl color. And I'll tie it in from about an eye length behind the hook eye, all the way back to the base of that tail. I'll run my thread back up again. Then I'm going to reach over here and grab my head cement. And I like to put just a bead of head cement down before I wrap that diamond braid. That just toughens that up a bit. So I'm going to pick up that diamond braid and I'm going to start wrapping from the bend. And I'm not really trying to build anything up here. It's really just to cover that. Kind of give the fly a little bit more finished look. We'll tie that off. A couple turns of thread up here at the front and trim that out. Just wrap down over those buttons just to smooth that down a bit. So we've got the body and the tail put on there. And now for the collar, there's a couple little tricks to the collar. We're going to use some nice white bucktail. And I generally like to use bucktail that's a little bit wavy. I do like it to be straight, but a little bit wavy. It just gives you more volume with less material. And one of the tricks on this fly is to kind of keep it sparser than you certainly sparser than you think, and maybe even sparser than that. But I'm going to take a clump of white here, and I'm just sort of hand stacking this. I've kind of cut it off the bucktail, and I'll just sort of pull out the longest ones and even them up again. And I don't want them stacked up perfectly. I want them a little bit jig-jagged, and that'll kind of break up the silhouette a bit. And we're going to use this for the bottom half of the collar, like so. You can see that's not perfectly evenly stacked. It's even got some short stuff in there. I don't worry too much about that. And I've got my thread hanging at the back of that. I'm about maybe an eye length and a half behind the hook eye, but I'm hanging right in front of the body, so fairly far back from the hook eye here. And I'm going to take this white bucktail and I'm going to measure it about halfway up the tail. I'm going to lay it on the far side of the hook, and I'm going to bring my thread around it a couple times and let it kind of push down to the bottom. And you've got to kind of reach in and get it around the hook point. And then I can sort of push it around and lock it in place. So that collar is just on the bottom half of the hook, where that first white belly piece is anyway, like so. And then I'll lift these butt ends, make sure that's anchored down. I'll take these butt ends and pull them down, and I'm going to come in and trim those. And that'll give me sort of an angled cut right there so that I don't have a sharp edge. And now for the top of this collar. Now, of course, you could do all white, just straight all the way around. That's probably what the original Deceiver was. Matter of fact, I'm pretty sure of that from looking at Lefty's books over the years. But we're going to make a multicolored one. And to that end, what I've done here, sort of ahead of time, is I've taken a clump of bucktail, or several small clumps of bucktail in varying colors, and just sort of hand stacked them. You can see I've got some chartreuse, some blue, some gray, might be some olive in there. I think there's a few strands of purple. Just kind of mix that up a bit. And I just did that in my hands. And I'm going to take about half of that size clump. And again, we want to keep this fly fairly sparse. And you can see I just sort of roll that in my fingers and mix that together. You can kind of peel it apart, put it back together, work it through your stacker. Even your good hair stacker is not gonna stack this stuff very well, so it's still going to come out a bit ragged. But these mixed colors kind of give you a little bit more bait fish impression. I'm going to take this clump, move my thread back to the back of the head, and measure it to the same length as the white. And I'll set that in on top and take a couple turns, just kind of get it locked in. And then I want to sort of push it down around the sides a bit. I don't want it just on top. I want it on the top half, like so. And then I'll lift those butt ends up and get my scissors in here. I want to make sure this is anchored. Bucktail is a hard material, so you want to make sure you anchor it tightly with your thread. You can see even with those tight wraps on it, it wanted to move. So I'm going to come in and trim these butt ends out, including those three. And I'm not really going to worry too much about smoothing that thread head off just yet. Now, right here, speaking of original, you could stop right there and call it good. Whip finish that, maybe throw some head cement on the head, and you'll catch probably just as many fish as you ever would. We're going to dress this one up just a bit more and kind of do the last few final pieces to kind of make them even prettier. And to that, we're going to take this is some dyed green peacock curl. Regular natural peacock curl will work. This is just what I had in my drawer that was right on top. I'm going to take, I've got probably 10 or 12 strands here. Like so. I'm going to measure that just longer than the bucktail collar. And I'll lay that in on top and catch that with a few turns. And trim those butt ends out. Now, one thing I like to do at this point, you can see that peacock wants to kind of stand up a bit. I like to lift that up, kind of get it separated from the bucktail. And then if you use the back edge of your scissor blade and kind of roll it up this like a ribbon gently. It'll curl that so it lays nice and neatly over the top of the fly. And it gives the fly a nice dark back. That one didn't want to cooperate. We'll curl him up a little more. All right, and then we're going to put just a little throat on here. And there's a ton of things you could use for the throat. I'm going to use some fluff off the base of a red schlappen feather. You could use red marabou. You could use red crystal flash. I think the original version used red crystal flash. I'm going to use this schlappen. It's just a little bit more subtle. And one of the keys to this is just take a short little bunch. Don't get carried away with it. It's easy to use too much. So I'm going to take this clump and I'm going to lay it in along the far side and bring my thread over it so it'll pull it to the bottom. Get a couple turns on there. And then I'll trim those butt ends out. You can see we've got our little red throat. And now I'll start to build the thread head. Now, depending on what you're doing from here, we're going to put some eyes on this just because, again, I said I was going to give you the full dress version. And in that case, I really don't need to build this thread head quite as smoothly as I'm going to, because we're going to put some resin and eyeballs over the top. That could have been fairly rough still, but as he sits now, that's what you would do if you weren't going to put the stick-on eyes on. Originally, this fly had painted-on eyes, and I still love that. It's just a lot more time-consuming. It makes a really cool-looking fly, though. And what you'd do if you were going to paint the eyes on is you would put a coat of head cement over this plain thread head as it sits now and let that dry. And then you'd come in with a nail head dipped in Tester's model paint, probably some amber or yellow, and dot on each side of the head and let that dry. And then you'd come back tomorrow and you'd put a smaller nail head into black paint and dot that on. And that would give you the kind of finished head. And then you could put some epoxy, or in these days, it would be resin, over the top of all of that. So as we sit here now, we're going to just take a couple of stick-on eyes. And I'm going to use chartreuse. And I'm going to put one on my near side here. And I set these toward the back of the head so that they sort of overlap onto the bucktail a bit. And that's twofold. I don't like the eyes on any baitfish to be right at the nose. That's not where they appear on the real critter. And two, that's going to let us use some of the resin that we put on here to sort of bleed into the collar and just add some durability there as well. So you can see I'm just pressing those adhesive eyes on. That adhesive is good enough to hold them in place for right now, but they'll come right off when you fish them. So you've got to do something from there. And what that something is I'm going to take some Solares Bone Dry Plus here, and I'm going to put just a dab here between the eyes, it's fairly thin stuff. Let that run down on top of the thread head, and then I'll cook that with my light. And you want to hold the light fairly far away so that it doesn't cure that material too fast, and kind of blink the light on and off of it. But that'll anchor our eyes in place. Then I can turn the fly over and do the same thing on the bottom. And this is one of the huge advantages of resin over epoxy, is that you can dry this fairly quickly and kind of get it all positioned just exactly how you want it. I'm going to build the top of that head up just bigger than the eyes, cook that in place. Get one more little coat on the bottom. Now, of course, you could use thicker resin here. I like to do this in kind of multiple coats. So multiple coats of thinner resin seems to work better for me, but by all means, do what you like. And then finally, I'm just going to put a coat over the top of the eyes, kind of attached to the head. And that'll actually make the eyes and the head all one piece. I'll cook all that. And again, don't get that lamp too close. It's old habits die hard. But there's our finished Lefty's Deceiver, sort of full-dressed version with the fancy throat and multicolored bucktail topping. But you can see how you could, a couple saddle feathers, a little clump of bucktail do pretty darn good job as it is. So thanks for watching. That's one of the best flies of all time. I don't like that piece of hurl right there. Just got rid of it. Best flies of all time. And there's a lot of, most of the saltwater flies that we fish these days are really, when when you boil it right down, really variations on this theme. Almost all the key style tarpon flies, the cockroach, are all variations of this theme. There's so many sort of articulated trout streamers these days too that when you really look at it, the way you tie it and kind of break it down to the essence, they're variations on a deceiver. So, groundbreaking fly back in its day, I think in the 50s or 60s, maybe before that, long before my time, is when this fly first came around, but it's still around today, and I can take this one out tomorrow somewhere salty and damn near guarantee I'd catch fish on it. So that's the Lefty's Deceiver. Hope you enjoyed that. Thanks for watching. Take care.